I want you to try to draw up in your mind's remembrance a really horrible smell, maybe one of the worst smells that you've ever smelled in your life. Can you think about that? Can you think about something that you smelled that was just absolutely horrible, sickening to smell it? I don't know about you, but one of the things that sort of stands out in my mind is the smell of something that's dead, something that's died a few days ago, maybe an animal that died a few days ago, and that smell is just horrendous. And it's almost like it gets in your nose and it stays there. You may have left that place where the dead animal was, and you can still have that sense or smell in your nose maybe hours after you experienced it. So some horrible, terrible smell like that. You hate it, and obviously you want to avoid it. All right, the Bible has a word that describes that sort of thing. And the Bible word that's descriptive of that we were just talking about is the word abomination. The Bible word abomination has that very connotation to it. Other newer versions, the older versions use the word abomination. Other newer English versions of the Bible will use a word like detestable or loathsome. Same concept, really. Now, here's our thought. That terrible stench, just a sickening, almost make you sick to your stomach, that stench. Can you imagine you producing that kind of reaction in God Himself? That you could act or live in such a way that you would produce this sickening smell to God, a detestable, loathsome smell, smelling like a dead animal maybe, an abomination. Well, obviously you wouldn't want to do that, right? And thankfully we know the kind of things that we ought to avoid so that we don't do that. And our series continues this evening from Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 through 19. 7 things God hates. Look at the text. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto Him. There's the word. So these things that we're studying in this series of lessons are things that are detestable to God, loathsome. It's like a horrible stench in His nose. And you, if you're not careful, could be producing that kind of reaction from God. What are the things that are an abomination to Him? Well, we talked about a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief. Tonight, our 6th of the 7 things is a false witness that speaketh lies. We want to address that topic tonight, that one of the 6 things, or 7 things, number 6 out of 7. That's our study tonight. We stopped just for a minute to add words of welcome to those that have already been offered. We're glad that you're here. We appreciate you making it a point here at the end of this beautiful Lord's Day to come again, to join together in worship. What better way to end a Lord's Day than to spend another hour together singing, praying, studying from God's Word. I often want to ask the question, what would you rather be doing tonight? What is there that would draw your attention or your interest or your desire more than this? I don't know. If there is something that is more interesting to you, more appealing to you than this, then probably there's a problem that needs to be addressed. This ought to be our most enjoyable time together when we join together in worship to God. Thanks for being here tonight. We appreciate you and appreciate our visitors very much. All right, so we're going to talk about a false witness that speaketh lies. I want you to notice there's 7 things in this list, obviously, and 2 of the 7 things involve lying. We already talked up here about a lying tongue, and now we're talking about a false witness that speaketh lies. So our first observation is simply this: 2 out of the 7. More than 25% of the things that it says God hates involve lying. God hates it when we don't tell the truth. Men, of course, are prone to excuse that. Doesn't matter to men. Men, as we've looked at some statistics about this, men are given over to lying. In our day and time, people lie without any reservation whatsoever, without any qualm of conscience whatsoever, people lie. But God hates that. God hates when we don't tell the truth, and we need to understand that. 2 out of these 7 things involve lying. Now, what we're talking about tonight is a specific kind of lying, a false witness that speaks lies. This is a specific kind of lying. This is, in particular, telling lies about someone else, bearing false witness or giving false testimony, and that's with the intention of harming or hurting someone else. So God hates a lying tongue in general, and specifically He hates it when false testimony, a false witness, when we tell lies that are specifically intended to harm someone else. This is such an important consideration that the law of Moses included lots of warnings about it, and even had some harsh punishments listed for those who were found giving false witness. Notice that one of the 10 commandments involved this. This is actually the 9th of the 10 commandments listed in Exodus chapter 20, verse 16. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So you have to think about those 10 commandments. We still pay attention to the 10 commandments, and we sort of recite them and teach. We don't think we're under that law of Moses. I'll make sure everybody understands that. But we still have particular interest in the things that were included in the 10 commandments. And as we often point out, 9 of the 10 commandments are repeated in the New Testament verbatim, or at least in principle, repeated in the New Testament. But it was very important to God, and He included among the 10 commandments, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. The 10 commandments, many of the 10 commandments, were designed to protect things of value. Think about that for a minute. And some of the 10 commandments would protect the home and the family and marriages. Others of the 10 commandments would protect property rights and so forth. This of the 10 commandments, the 9th, protects a person's good name and reputation. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So it's very important to God. It still is. In the law of Moses, there was instruction as to what to do in a case where it was suspected that someone was bearing false witness. Here's how they were to proceed. If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, the judges shall make diligent inquisition. In other words, so this doesn't sound right. This is a suspicious report we're hearing from this guy. So the judges make inquiry. And behold, if the witness be a false witness and hath testified falsely against his brother, then shall ye do to him as he thought to have done to his brother. So the penalty was, if you find out this guy's lying and he's offering a false testimony against someone else, what you do is, then shall ye do to him as he had thought to have done to his brother. All right? So he's telling a lie about this guy. It's found out that he's telling a lie about this guy. The penalty for this guy, if he had been convicted on the basis of that false testimony, that penalty is going to be assigned to the guy who gave the false testimony. That's a pretty harsh penalty, isn't it? And that's exactly what this text says was to be done. When they did that, it says, so shalt thou put away the evil. So the evil was to be put away by doing this. And those which remain shall hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more such evil among you. And so the penalty on that guy was, you do to him what he was trying to get done to this guy he was lying about. That's what you do with him. And you make sure to do that so that the evil is punished and put away, and everybody else learns, don't be doing that. Don't be bearing false witness. And so this is pretty strong, I think, if you'll agree with me. It was included in the 10 Commandments and specific punishments for those who would violate that instruction. The lying of a false witness is particularly designed to hurt someone else. Now, that I think is probably what makes this such a terrible thing. Lying in itself is awful. This is a particularly awful form of lying because the intention of it is to do harm to someone else. I want you to look at another passage here from the book of Proverbs and notice the metaphors that the Holy Spirit used to describe a false witness who sets out to harm the good name and reputation of someone else. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. You can't trust that guy. It's like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. But notice, he says, the false witness against his neighbor, it's like a club, like a sword, like a sharp arrow. And you know it really is. If you've ever been the victim of someone who was bearing false witness, trying to harm you or ruin your reputation, it is as though you have been clubbed. Someone took a sword and took a swipe at you, shot an arrow into your heart. This is a very hurtful thing. But that's what a false witness is attempting to do, specifically to harm someone else. We got a number of Bible examples of people who suffered that sort of thing. For instance, King David in the Psalms wrote about the fact that he was falsely accused, and he mentioned that it just very nearly destroyed him. In Psalm 27, verse 12, beginning, Deliver me not over into the will of mine enemies, for false witnesses are risen up against me, and such as breathe out cruelty. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And so in this passage, David suggested that this process of being lied about and the false witnesses who were bearing testimony against him, he said, I just nearly wiped me out. I was just about gone. And the only thing that would make it possible for him to survive that is, he said, he put his faith and confidence in God. You know, I think that's what we've got to do too, because situations like this sadly will arise. And when they do, it can be an incredibly devastating experience. David speaks to that here. But he says the thing that helped him through it was to continue to look to God. And of course, that's what we got to do in all times, but especially in times such as that. So David, he knew that. He experienced that sort of thing as false witnesses set out to ruin him. In the New Testament, the man Stephen experienced that. We don't know a tremendous lot of personal information about Stephen. He arrives on the scene in Acts chapter 6. He's one of the 7 men who was chosen in Jerusalem to especially care for the needy widows there in the Jerusalem church. He was empowered to work miracles. He preached the gospel, and the Jews didn't like it. And of course, we know that they stoned him, and we often refer to Stephen as the first Christian martyr. He was stoned to death in chapter 7 of Acts. So we don't know a whole lot of personal information about him, but what we do, he sure stands out as a notable, worthy example for us. But notice what they did to Stephen in Acts chapter 6, verse 8. Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and miracles among the people, and they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spake. Then they suborned men, which said, We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God, and set up false witnesses, which said, This man ceaseth not to speak blasphemous words. That was all lies, right? Not a shred of truth to what they were saying about Stephen. How'd that turn out, by the way? Well, it turned out with Stephen being stoned to death on the testimony of these false witnesses. That's how powerful a false witness can be in ruining a good man's reputation. And they certainly did that to Stephen, and he was put to death. The Apostle Paul suffered through that same sort of thing also. We talk about Paul so much, and I think all of us are so encouraged by the example that the Apostle Paul left behind, a tireless worker. He just never gave up, did everything in it that he possibly could to further the kingdom of Christ. But he was pursued. He had his enemies. They tried constantly to do harm to him. And we remember, of course, in the final chapters of the book of Acts that at the end of the 3rd missionary journey, when he returned to Jerusalem, he was arrested. He hadn't even done anything wrong. They didn't have any formal charges that they could bring against him. But they arrested him, and he remained a prisoner for a long time, ultimately transported to Rome to stand trial before Caesar. But notice how they accomplished all that in the case of Paul. The Jews which came down from Jerusalem, Acts 25, verse 7, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about and laid many grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. So this was false witness, right? That's exactly what they were doing. They were laying accusations against him, and they had no proof whatsoever that anything wrong had happened. They couldn't prove what they were saying. They made grievous complaints, but they couldn't prove the things that they were saying. Paul himself was a victim of false witnesses. Of course, the ultimate example is Jesus Christ himself, a sinlessly perfect individual. Jesus had no sin whatsoever. And yet evil men hated him, and they set about to ruin him, and ultimately, of course, hung him on the cross of Calvary. How do you do that? If you've got a guy who is sinlessly perfect, how do you accomplish the fact that you have him executed like a common criminal on a cross? How do you take this sinlessly perfect individual and hang him like a common criminal on the cross? How do you do that? Well, you do that by lying about him. You do that by bearing false witness. And that's what they did, of course. In Mark chapter 14, verse 56, for many bear false witness against him. Notice this, but their witness agreed not together. And there arose certain and bare false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But neither so did their witness agree together. This is pretty bad. This is pretty bad form. You got to agree. The enemies of Jesus were doing a really bad job of bearing false testimony, because they get some guys to tell lies about Jesus. They can't even get these liars to lie in agreement with one another. The liars are contradicting one another with the lies that they tell. That's how bad it was in the case of Jesus. But of course, the false witnesses carried the day, and they were able to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. Think about this, though. If they would do that to Jesus, a perfect man, why would we think that we could be exempt from having that sort of treatment ourselves? It can happen. It does happen. And Jesus is our ultimate example. You can be perfect. There'll still be false witnesses who will try to ruin a reputation. And so that's what this bearing of false witness is particularly designed to do, to harm someone else. A false witness, even in cases where bodily harm does not result from the lies they tell, still they can irreparably ruin a reputation. A false witness assaults one of our most precious possessions. One of our most precious possessions is a good name, a good reputation. In Ecclesiastes 7, verse 1, a good name is better than precious ointment. In Proverbs 22, verse 1, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Your name, your reputation is of great value to you. And so a false witness, what he's doing is trying to take from you this thing of great value, your reputation. He says your good name is more important than great riches. A good name is to be preferred over even having great riches. I give you $1 million, but if I give you the $1 million, you're going to have to accept the fact that everybody knows that you are a dirty, rotten scoundrel. What would you do? In Proverbs it says you'd be better off to stick with your good name than to have great riches, right? But what does the false witness try to do? The false witness wants to take that from you. He wants to ruin your good name. And that's really a bad thing, a horrible thing. You know, a bad guy could steal my car. Well, I'd hate that for sure. But there are plenty of other cars. I can go get another car, right? I might even be able to go get a car a lot better than the one I've got right now. He can take my car, but that's not the only car there is in the world. And there's better, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot better cars out there than the one I've got. But if he takes my good name, if he ruins my reputation, that is almost an irreparable harm. It's interesting that even secular writers, even some well-known characters in history have spoken about this. And they're not speaking about this from a biblical perspective. But notice some quotes. I was easily able to find a number of quotes about the danger of a ruined reputation. A reputation once broken may possibly be repaired, but the world will always keep their eyes on the spot where the crack was. I think that's probably true, don't you? Benjamin Franklin said glass, china, and reputation are easily cracked and never well mended. The broken string may be joined, but a knot will always remain. Mark Twain said one of the striking differences between a cat and a lie is that the cat has only 9 lives. Think about it. You see what he's saying? A cat has 9 lives. A lie just keeps on going and going and going. And it's never over. And another, what people say behind your back is your standing in the community. And so if they're telling lies behind your back, then that's affecting your standing in a given community. A false witness does great harm as he sets about to ruin a reputation. And it may be that the reputation is never really mended. In contrast to the false witness that speaks lies, notice that a faithful person always tells the truth, regardless of the circumstances. A faithful person always tells the truth. It doesn't matter what the stakes are. It doesn't matter what the politically correct thing would be. It doesn't matter what the financial cost or gain might be. A faithful person is always going to tell the truth. Notice in Proverbs 14, verse 5, a faithful witness will not lie, but a false witness will utter lies. And so here's the contrast. A faithful witness, he will not lie. But a false witness, you can just count on it, he's going to utter lies. This false witness, you've heard that old expression, I can tell when he's lying, his lips are moving. Well, that's the kind of thing that this is saying. A false witness, that's just what he does. He tells lies. A faithful witness will not lie. Now, the question, of course, then is, what about us? What about you? What about me? What are we known for? Do you get the idea that this verse is describing 2 distinct categories of people? Faithful witnesses and false witnesses. And my suggestion to you is that we fall down on one side or the other of that equation. We either are known to be true witnesses, a faithful witness, or we're known to be a false witness who cannot be trusted because he always utters lies. Which camp are we in? I don't know about you, but I would like to think that over here, when we're talking about false witnesses, I would like to think that that just is describing people of this world, people who don't have any pretense of living for God. Those are the ones that are false witnesses. The whole category of people, politicians up in Washington, D.C., for instance, they're over here in this camp of the false witnesses. I'd like to think that camp of false witnesses is comprised completely and totally of that sort of people. But I want to tell you, sadly, people who call themselves Christians lie and bear false witness. People who identify themselves as Christians will try to ruin a good person's reputation too. It's not just people of the world who have this problem of bearing false witness. But we need to be faithful. We need to be faithful people who always tell the truth, regardless of the circumstances. Finally, let me suggest to you one thing. And the Bible is very blunt about this. God will punish those who do not tell the truth. In Proverbs 19, verse 5, a false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. You need any help understanding that statement? That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaketh lies shall not escape. An abomination. A false witness that speaketh lies is an abomination to God. It's like a horrible stench that gets up in your nose and won't go away. This text is telling us that we could do that. We could produce such a foul, odious odor in God's nose. He hates it. It's an abomination. Obviously, we want to avoid that at all costs. We want to be the faithful people who always speak the truth, because God hates a false witness that speaks lies. Thanks for your good attention to what we've had to say. I hope it's an encouragement to us all. Again, I want to remind you, and I'm kind of impressed by this personally, 7 things God hates. 2 out of the 7 involve telling lies. God hates it when we tell lies. He hates it when men tell lies. Don't ever forget that. And let us always be people who tell the truth. Thanks for your good attention to what we've had to say. We're going to end our lesson with a song of invitation. As we sing this song, we'll be asking all who are here, think about your relationship with God and make sure it's right. If you need to obey that simple gospel plan of salvation, hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized for the remission of sins. If you need to do that, we'd be anxious to assist in your obedience or study with you more. If you're a Christian in need of prayers of the saints, let us know how we can help while we stand and sing.
In Christ your broken life.